Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari, and today I'm joined by potential Providence mayoral candidate in the 2022 election and the City Councilwoman for Ward 3, City Councilwoman Nirva LaFortune. Councilwoman LaFortune, how are you today?
Hello, Raymond. I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thank you for coming on the show. I'm glad we were finally able to make this happen. We've been emailing back and forth for the past couple months.
Thank you. I'm happy as well.
And just diving right into it here, you've been fundraising and getting ready for a potential run in the 2022 Providence Mayoral Election. At this point, you're still currently exploring the option of running for mayor in 2022. What has influenced your decision to look at the option of potentially running for mayor?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, Ray, as I've shared with you when we spoke, I'm from Providence. Providence is my home. My parents have been living in the same house for 30 years in the neighborhood that I grew up in. I went through the Providence Public Schools. I'm choosing to raise my children here in our city. I think it's a city with a lot of potential, but we certainly need a leader that can help push our city forward, that can invest in our neighborhoods and make sure that everyone, regardless of what neighborhood they live in, have the best quality of life that they deserve. And also our kids are receiving the quality education that they deserve so that they too can progress and also come back, whether they go to college or they go through a training and development program for the workforce, but they can come back like I did to reinvest in our community.
And I had mentioned at the top of that question, you're still currently exploring the option. And while you've been fundraising, you still have quite a bit of time before you would have to make that final decision. Right now, we're seeing it's looking like a potential 4 to 5 candidate race for the Democratic primary for mayor. When could we expect an official launch? Are we looking at the fall, winter, January 2022?
So what I'm going to say is soon and stay tuned.
And a big part of running for local elections for even offices like mayor here in Providence is there's a big emphasis on mainly knocking on doors and listening to the residents, attending community events, hearing what their concerns are and what are on the minds of voters. What have been some of the issues that you've heard when speaking to the Providence residents and voters?
So the number one issue, whether the person has children who are in the school, whether the person is elderly, whether it's a business, it's our educational system. People are very concerned because if you think about it, without a strong educational foundation in the city, it actually impacts our economic opportunities. Businesses want to come into a city with a good school system so their employees can live and work and send their children to our school right here in Providence. People want to be able to live in a neighborhood where their kids can have access to a quality education. And folks are also who are entrepreneurs, who've been in the city for a long time, who are hiring locally, they want to pull from our local communities, but we have to have people who have a solid educational background to be able to hire for these positions. And so education has been a top priority for everyone. And also folks want to make sure that when they get older and they decide to sell their house, we have the people here who can purchase them. And so, but again, we need a quality education to prepare our young people for the real world.
And while we're on the topic of issues, now shifting to one of the big issues in the past couple of weeks is public safety. And statistically, in the summer, crime is at its highest. We've seen a couple of upticks in crime recently. And while overall it has been going down statistically, but there have been a little bit of spikes that have caught the attention of the local and even national media. And also, when we talk about the issue of public safety, the arguments of if the police department should be defunded or not also come up. And this is a question I've asked every other candidate so far in the mayoral election, speculated or potential. Where do you stand on the issue of defunding the police in Providence?
So going back to your point around the statistics around crime throughout the nation, we've seen an influx all over the country. The pandemic has exacerbated the inequities that currently exist. Some of the issues in terms of poverty, housing, lack of transportation, lack of job opportunities, education, access to healthcare, those have been issues that have impacted marginalized communities for quite some time. When you look at the cases of COVID, the areas that it's hitting the hardest, it is communities of color. It is marginalized communities. We've also had our rec centers have been closed for quite some time. They just recently opened. We didn't have as many after school programs. Kids right at the start of the pandemic, had to transition to remote learning, which is new for most people. So it's been a difficult time. And we've seen a lack of investments and initiatives to really support our youth in that space, that safe space that they had in programming and mentorship, just wasn't there. And so when it comes to public safety and keeping our community safe, we certainly want to make sure that we have a public safety unit that could respond to violent incidents. We also want to make sure within that public safety structure, there's ways for us to respond to crises that may not be violent crises, that might be mental or behavioral health, and connect people to services. But we also need to think about how can we proactively invest in initiatives that could prevent those crimes from happening. And so my approach is it's a comprehensive approach. Is in collaboration with public safety, we need to ensure that we're making the necessary investments in our communities. We should be working with the Nonviolent Institute, because guess what? These outreach workers, when they had more outreach workers, we didn't see as much violent crimes happening in our city because they were working in the community, preventing incidents that may escalate. They were stabilizing it, right? Using non-conflict strategies to de-escalate. So we need that in partnership. So what we should be doing in terms of public safety is our public safety department should be working with community entities to proactively address the issues that are impacting our communities, because they're systemic, right? They've been around for quite some time. So in terms of allocating funds into areas like crisis response team, making sure that the Nonviolence Institute has the resources to work with the police department to address the crime in our city, I think it's critical.
And touching upon what you said towards that answer, because I do want to go in depth to having the mental health workers responding to mental health and addiction crises in just a second. But going back to what you said, allocating funds, this is a follow-up question I usually ask, because I had spoken about it with Brett Smiley, who's also running for mayor in the same primary. And he said he was in favor of expanding the pie, like getting the tax base to be bigger so that he wouldn't have to take money out of the police budget to fund those programs like you had mentioned. Would you be similar? Would you have a similar approach, or would you take money from the police budget in order to fund these programs?
Well, expanding the tax base takes time. And also, to expand the tax base, you need to attract people to want to live in the city of Providence, people from the middle income and higher bracket moving here. But you know what they're looking for? Quality education. They want to make sure that they can send their kids to our schools. So if you want someone to live in Providence and invest in the city of Providence and grow the tax base, then we need to make those investments, which also has a direct correlation with the public safety issues that exist in our community. So back to what I said before, we need to make those investments. So if you want to grow the tax base, so we're not taking funds out of any of our entities, because if it's coming from the city's general fund, then it could be coming from anywhere. If we want to keep our various departments functioning and well-resourced, then yes, we do need to have a solid tax base, but we also need to have a comprehensive plan and strategically allocate funding so that every department has the tools that they need to serve our city. And that includes public safety. That includes DPW to make sure our roads are clean. That also includes investing in our public schools so that we can educate our young people. We can provide a full wraparound services within our schools so that students can get the mental behavioral health support that they need, so that they can deal with trauma rather than take the path that will lead them into violent crimes.
And just kind of like touching upon it one more time, with the allocating the funds, do you see any of it coming from the police budget at all, or would this be coming from other areas?
So I actually am one of the people who pushed to create a crisis response initiative within the city of Providence. And, last month, I joined the mayor, the public safety department, to announce the partnership with Providence Center and Providence Center Family Services and public safety. Crisis response is part of public safety. That should be a unit, an initiative that's within our public safety structure. So the reality is, it is public safety.
And now looking at another big issue that the city is facing, which is our unfunded pension obligation system, which is over $1 billion. I think it's heading towards $2 billion, if I recall correctly. This the concern here is that if it keeps going further down the hole, it could eventually bankrupt the city. I ended up talking to the council president about this on the show, and he said that it's not likely that the city could go into receivership, but the mayor saying that it could potentially lead to bankruptcy if it keeps getting worse. As mayor, how would you address the issue of the pension fund?
So one of the first things I did as a newly elected council person was to work on the pension report with my former fellow council person, Councilman Sam Zurier. And we outlined recommendations in how to address the pension liability. It's not a one solution approach. It's going to take a multifaceted, a multi-strategy approach. And so we can start from there. The state had also a pension crisis, but they created a comprehensive plan. They stuck to it, and we're starting to see some positive outcomes. And they're getting to the point where they can get fully funded. And so we need to work on a plan to get our pension system fully funded, but also create a pathway so at some point our municipal workers can be part of the state pension system. We're a small city, and so we should not have a separate pension system, especially since we're the capital city of the state of Rhode Island. But we've looked at some of the recommendations. We wrote it in the report, and so that's the starting tool. And what we need to do is work with the local stakeholders, people who are experts, with the actuary, and create a comprehensive plan, a long-term comprehensive plan in addressing our pension liability.
And one of the recommendations that I bring up on the show frequently when covering Providence politics, and I've gotten different answers whenever I ask it. I've been told one time if we could do this legally, it would only free up to 10 to 12 million, but that could still be 10 to 12 million that isn't from our annual budget every year. That could be used for like housing, roads, public safety, those programs like you mentioned. So the solution I usually talk about, and obviously this wouldn't like completely eradicate the problem, but it could be a start, is something that Cranston did years ago, which is getting out of the pension business and moving to individually owned 401ks for the new hires. And one of your opponents in the primary, Gonzalo Cuervo, he had mentioned it would free up 10 to 12 million out of the 90 million that we funnel out of our annual budget if we could do it legally. And given that that could be a start to fixing the problem, is that an idea that you would consider when tackling this issue?
Thank you for asking. That's actually one of the ideas, having a hybrid model that we outline in the pension report. Again, it's not a one strategy approach. And we should look at all of our options. So having a 401k, I mean, which most private employers, that's what they do. I'm part of a 401k. But again, that's one of the ideas that is outlined in the report.
And this is a question that I don't usually ask, but what would it take for that to be enacted? Would that be something that the council has to pass and the mayor signs into law, or is that like based on an agreement with the state? Like, how would that work?
Well, you have to also bring in the unions for that conversation, because the municipal workers have to accept this plan. And so we would have to bring all the people who are going to be impacted to the table. Now, legally, the current retirees, we can't just switch up the pension plan that they're a part of, but any new employee, we could look at some other options. But we also need to make sure that we're taking into consideration the mechanism to continue to fund the current pension system, so that the retirees who are receiving benefits can continue to receive the benefits that was outlined in their agreement. And so in order to get to that point, we do have to bring everyone to the table and come to some sort of consensus, and also make sure that it's legally practical and financially practical.
And now looking at some of the noteworthy things the current mayor has done, Mayor Jorge Elorza, one of the things he had done, I believe was at the beginning of this year or like later last year, he had signed an executive order that makes the first steps towards reparations in the city of Providence. Multiple things are being considered, like removing the names of people who were involved in slavery and other injustices off of buildings, and an idea that has been adopted in Evanston, Illinois, where they would use a tax revenue from legalized marijuana and like fund housing as a form of reparations. And he's currently in like the process of like beginning these conversations. If elected mayor, would you plan on continuing those plans that Mayor Elorza started?
Well, I do appreciate the work that Mayor Elorza has been doing to uncovering the truth. around racism and the history of slavery and racism within our state, within the city of Providence. I think that is critical, especially in addressing the inequities and the systemic racism that exists in every sector. Nicole Anna Jones wrote a piece about reparation, and she talks about W.E.B. Du Bois in his piece, because he also talked about supporting and investing in Black communities, and talks about reparation and the disparities within Black communities, and also post-emancipation, and how formerly enslaved people were kind of left on their own, but they were supposed to be wardens of the state, but we're not giving the tools and resources to move forward. I mean, these are people who were working on plantations all of their lives, didn't have a proper education, and then they're emancipated, but where do they go? So a lot of them were forced to go back to the plantations that they were enslaved on. And so when we talk about reparation, it's quite complicated, because we also have to dig deeply to find who are the descendants of American enslaved people. But we also need to make sure that we're educating our community around what that means, and the history of slavery and racism, and race and racism within our communities. So I think there could be multiple approaches. One, we can look at really investing in a curriculum, which we're seeing now. We're at the state level. We're going to have a curriculum that's more inclusive. And we need to make sure that it's being taught on a regular basis, having areas within our city so the public can learn about the history of our communities, but more importantly, investing in our neighborhoods, making sure that people of color, Black people, marginalized communities, immigrants, because what makes Providence so beautiful is the unique diversity. And if we want people to succeed, we need to make the proper investments. And I do think that continuing that conversation, continue the efforts are critical, are important, but we also need to take action, which means making the investments so that we can narrow that disparity gap that currently exists.
And while we're still talking about things Mayor Elorza has either started to address or has done as mayor, one of his notable achievements is declaring Providence a sanctuary city. Now, whenever I ask this question, either in regards to like if Providence is a sanctuary city, or what the policies would you consider either going forward with that, I get different answers. Councilman Salvatore said under the federal definition, we're not a sanctuary city. And then I've gotten told that it's not a sanctuary city at all. I've gotten told that it has been in the past, and that they would embrace it and go further policy-wise. So I'm going to alternate this question, as instead of just asking what's your stance on it. Do you consider Providence a sanctuary city?
So I'm an immigrant, and as you know, I was an undocumented immigrant. And so Providence has been my home since I first came to America at the age of 3. Providence, again, is a city of people, a city of many people from diverse backgrounds. And the people who are residents in our city are people who are documented, and there are people who are not documented. Regardless of what your immigration status may be, everyone should live in a city where they feel safe, where they feel protected, where they can thrive, where they can pursue a pathway to citizenship. But we also have to push our federal legislators to pass policy so that we can make it easier for people to become documented residents. But there are undocumented people who are teaching, who are taking care of our families, who are working in our food industry, who are first responders. Majority of our immigrant population are nurses, CNAs, et cetera. So my stance on this is that we live in a city where there are representation from all over the world. And we need to make sure that everyone who lives in the city of Providence is safe, whether there is legal stature, but everyone, or not everyone, should feel safe in the city of Providence. And so there are definitely legal obligations that we as elected officials and our leaders have to abide to, but that shouldn't mean that we put our residents at risk. Because I know firsthand what it means to be separated from your family. Immigrants who come into this country make the difficult decision to leave their homes. They're coming here, coming to a new, like they have to learn a new language. They leave everything behind. They're reestablishing themselves, starting over. It's a challenge. And one of the things that I've had the opportunity to do is meet people from different backgrounds. Even during the pandemic, I volunteered with Higher Grounds International, Mount Hope Community Center, delivering food, and other organizations throughout the city. And I just met people from all over. I remember there was this woman, she was from Dominican Republic and she didn't speak English. And she was like, I'm struggling right now. How can I just get some groceries from my family? And I was able to connect her to the United Way, as well as Higher Grounds International for some resources. But if you're here, you're abiding to the laws of our country and in our state and city, then you deserve to feel safe. And you should have an opportunity or the pathway to thrive and support your family.
And while we're still on this topic, I believe like what I was getting at earlier is policy-wise, we're technically not, but Mayor Elorza himself has called Providence a sanctuary city. If elected mayor, would you consider shifting to be a sanctuary city policy-wise?
Absolutely. So in terms of policy, is what are the policies that you establish to make sure that it's an inclusive city? It's making sure that there are tools and resources that are accessible to all people, right? And we've done that. We've advocated for benefits that can go to undocumented populations. That was done during the pandemic, but it's all about accessibility and making sure that the resources, the tools, and the policies that we establish as a city benefits all people, regardless of their immigration status, regardless of what neighborhood they live in. Everyone here in Providence should feel safe and should feel protected and should also feel that they have the tools to thrive and take care of their families. That's creating an equity, and that should come from an equity framework. So everything that I do is going to come from an equity framework, because I know firsthand what it means to be an undocumented person, what it means to be a documented person. I come from a working class immigrant family. And so, so my goal is to make sure that we live in a city, in an inclusive city, and all policies and practices are equitable and accessible.
And touching upon the issue you had mentioned at the top of the interview when talking about what issues you've heard from residents, I want to focus now on education. And this has multiple avenues, the way fixing the issue of education in the city can be approached. So let's talk about the Providence public school system first, because that's one of the main ones. For years it was failing and required a state takeover. And I'm just curious, what do you think could have been done differently in terms of fixing Providence's public school system over the years?
All right. So first, Raymond, I want to say that my graduate degree is in urban education policy. And so looking at different approaches and policies throughout the country has been something that I've been doing for years. One thing that I would have done differently is in terms of the state takeover, as a parent, one of the things that I wanted to see was a bold approach to really address our educational problem. And what I was hoping came out of it was a comprehensive plan, not just from Providence, but for the whole state of Rhode Island, and then providing municipalities like Providence the tools so that they can rise up. Massachusetts created a comprehensive education plan over 20 years ago. They've stuck to it. Every time we have a new leader, our plan changes. Every time money runs out, we stop the program. Before we even assess an initiative, we start something new. So we really don't even know what's been working, what has not. But one thing I can say confidently is that there are many resources that's in schools that I've benefited from, that my children have benefited from. I was part of after school programs. I was a crusader, where I had a mentor who came to the school a couple of times per week that I was meeting with, who can help me navigate the college application process, who told me about summer programs. I was part of summer programs. I was part of after school programs. My son participated in PASA. My daughter played basketball. My son, ran track. I was a thrower in high school. And also there were tutoring opportunities that were afforded to me. We already know what are the programs and initiatives that work. We just need to make sure that our schools have those resources so that we're creating wraparound services within our public schools, and that the families can have the tools, and also the teachers and administrators, to be successful. But again, we need a comprehensive educational plan that we stick to. We set thresholds or benchmarks. And if we're not meeting those benchmarks, we need to kind of regroup and figure out what's working, what's not working, what are the needs, and we stick to it. We're not going to change our educational challenges overnight. It's going to take time, but we need a plan. We need to stick to the plan. And we also need to bring all the people to the table. We need the parents, we need the teachers, we need the leaders, we need the businesses, we need the students, the youth to be a part of this discussion. When you look at initiatives throughout the country, the ones that have worked in reforming education is the ones that are inclusive of the people who are most impacted. They're a more comprehensive, community-based approach. And that's what we need. But we need a plan, and we need to stick to the plan. And whoever is the leaders at the state level or the city level, when it changes, we need to continue on that plan and also build upon it every single year. But this approach of every time there's someone new, we're changing it up, or we're starting from scratch, we've been going in circles for quite some time. So listen, our educational system is important to me because I went through the schools. I just want to see the investments that it deserves. I want to make sure that every child, regardless of what neighborhood they live in, have access to a quality education. And I want to work on and see a plan that we can stick to, and the leaders are going to invest in.
And that is an interesting point you bring up, because the number of superintendents that the city has shifted through in the past couple of years is just crazy. But you had touched upon the state takeover a bit, and that was actually part of my follow-up on the Providence public school system. Do you believe the state takeover should continue, and if so, for how much longer?
I do think that we need to get the control back to the city, but you can't give the control back if, again, the city doesn't have what it needs to make sure that the schools can move forward and that we can make the investments. So there should be, again, going back to having a comprehensive plan, there should be a plan to bring back the control to the city of Providence and to the stakeholders. But we also need to make sure there's oversight so that we're doing what we say we're going to do. Again, a plan that we stick to. And the right people at the table, and all voices are heard, particularly the ones who are most impacted. And so, because the state, right, the state is overseeing every single district, not just Providence. The people who know Providence are the people who are in the schools, the people who are right here. So they should have control. And I get things weren't working, but the current state of the state, or the current structure of the state takeover is not working. You said that we've had multiple superintendents. We've had, since I moved back to Providence with my children, we've gone through 4 different superintendents. Do you know, I left Philadelphia in 2014 to move back. They had just hired a few years prior a superintendent. He's still there. He's still there. And we've gone through 4 different superintendents. And it sounds like we might go through another one. That's not fair. That's not fair to our students. That's not fair to our families. That's not fair to our administrators. It's not fair to our teachers. We need continuity.
And also, when talking about this topic education, before I move on to the next topic, looking at charter schools, because there's been a talk of expansion of charter schools. There was even a charter school moratorium introduced by a state that wouldn't allow an expansion or creation of a new one for the next 3 school years. Where do you stand on if there should be an expansion of charter schools in Providence or not?
Charter schools cannot solve our educational challenges that currently exist. Charter schools were created as lab schools. I was part of a charter school when we lived in Philadelphia. My son went to a dual language school, which was one of the first dual language schools in the state of Pennsylvania. It was right in Philadelphia. And he was, in the Spanish immersion program. I was an elected board member. I was the parent representative there. But that school also worked with the neighboring traditional public schools. The difference between so charter schools were created to serve as lab schools. It's also a lottery system. If your number is not called, then you don't get in. Where our neighborhood schools, if you're part of the catchment, that is your school that you're going to go to. So we can't leave people out. One of the things that we could start looking at is some of the best practices in some of that's happening in our local charter schools. We have international charter that has a dual language program. Leventon, has a dual language program. Expand the dual language so we could have it at more of our schools. The learning community. The learning community has invested in wraparound services. Let's take some of those strategies. Let's take some of the strategies that are happening at TAPA, which is the arts and performance schools, which is so beneficial, expressive art, creative art that allows young people to tell their story, heal from trauma, express themselves. Why don't we have some of those things happening in some of our schools and looking at some of the training and development program? One of the first statewide teacher development initiative was through Highlander. And I think it was focused on, individual learning plans, or I can't remember right now. I was there. It was wonderful to be in a room with teachers from across educators from across the state who were educators in charter school, educators in traditional public schools, from all over the state of Rhode Island in one room, sharing talking, sharing best practices, learning together. I want to see more of that happening. So rather than see our charter schools as a form of competition, why don't we, again, work with them? But we can't be investing in charter schools as a tool to address our educational system when Johnny or Victoria is going to Broad Street Elementary or Sackett Street or MLK or Central High School, and there's mold in the building and the ceiling is falling down. It's not fair. It's just not fair. So we need to make sure that we're investing in our neighborhood schools and working in collaboration with our charter schools to learn from some of the things that are doing that are well, and we can possibly implement them in our traditional publics.
I like to mention the TAPA there, totally not because I'm an alumni there, but
I didn't even know you were an alumni.
Class of 2020, but so it sounds like kind of like a healthy balance in the middle.
Yes.
And school choice also gets brought up in this conversation of education. What's your stance on school choice?
Well, it depends on how school choice is defined. So when I went to high school, I guess I had a choice to apply to Mount Pleasant High School for their magnet program. All of our high schools should have some sort of curriculum that might be a bit different, that offers our students a program that they might be interested in. Hope High School had the arts and theater program. Both of my sisters went there. Mount Pleasant had the teacher academy, the health academy, the business program. I was in the health academy. I thought I wanted to be a doctor until I went out on internship and I realized, oh my goodness, like bodily fluids is not my thing and I can't handle it. And so our parents, not our parents, but families should be able to have an option to send their kids, especially when they're pursuing high school. You have PCTA, classical, and classical should not just be the only choice, right? But all families should be able to look at any of our Providence public schools, especially as they're approaching high school, to say, you know what, I want to be an engineer. So maybe I should look into going to Mount Pleasant and getting into their engineering and tech program. Or I'm really interested in acting or music, so let me look at Hope High School, etc. So at the end of the day, all of our families should have access to a quality education, regardless of what neighborhood they live in. And the choice should be any one of our public schools.
And now shifting the focus to a big issue in Providence, and for those watching, I don't mean to sound like a broken record when I talk about this issue, but it's making Brown and PC pay their fair share, because when looking at all these issues, it kind of boils down to getting the money for these, like education, funding our city's roads, infrastructure. And one of the big things is 40% of the land is taken by Brown University and PC. And, you know, looking at how we can make them pay their fair share, I usually get a different answer each time I ask this. One time I was told by Councilman Salvatore that if the state would let the city tax these institutions, then it could be done. And then Council President Igliozzi said it could be a federal thing that they get their non-taxable status from. If elected mayor, what would your plan be to make Brown University and Providence College pay their fair share?
So it's all of our nonprofits, right? We have many major nonprofits within the city of Providence that range from our universities to our hospitals. We do have the pilot agreement that's in place. It will soon be expiring. I actually am the council member who introduced the resolution asking for a full assessment of the pilot programs. We should have a report to show if the current pilot program that exists is working and how it's benefiting our city. The way I see it, if you're a nonprofit within the city of Providence, if you're here, you're getting any type of incentive, then you should be making a real investment in our city. And if you are not utilizing land, to think about how can we use that land or that asset to benefit the city of Providence and its residents. There are also some programs that our universities are running, whether it's summer programs. I mean, I went to Brown Summer High School when I was a kid. I know that PC has their own programs. Johnson and Wales has their own initiatives, which one thing I would like to see with Johnson and Wales, it's some sort of culinary hospitality program where we're cultivating our young people to go into the hospitality industry. And there's a mentorship component, especially as we're seeing the shortage of people to work in those industries right now, which again is a direct result of the impact of COVID-19. But we should be assessing all of our nonprofits. And so hopefully we can get a report, because I already put in that resolution a while ago, and we can see what has been working, what has not. And then we bring all of the nonprofits to the table and we talk about what are some investments that can be made that directly benefit the city of Providence.
And just out of curiosity, when does that pilot program come to an end?
I believe it's 2023. I'm so sorry. It's in the back of my mind, but for some odd reason, I can't remember the exact date, but in the next year or two.
So it's something the next mayoral administration will have to address, essentially.
Yes, but the conversation should be started now.
And also part of what I mentioned in the buildup to the making Brown and PC pay their fair share question, infrastructure is a big topic. And, you know, this is my analogy, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but wouldn't the city have an advantage with making Brown and PC paying their fair share? Because are those colleges, what are they going to do? Just threaten to leave? That would hurt them, cost them more money to leave. And if they left, you know, the land goes back to the city and then you can use it for housing, you know, development and et cetera. So kind of focusing on like infrastructure and whatnot. When it comes to fixing, you know, the city's roads and increasing economic development, what would your plan be for those two things as mayor?
So in terms of allocating funds for our city road, infrastructure has been a pet peeve of mine for quite some time. And in fact, I did introduce an ordinance around coordinating work to address some of our infrastructure challenges. I broke an ankle, you know, on a tripping over a sidewalk. And I get a lot of complaints from my constituents, especially my elderly constituents. In fact, on Doyle Avenue, there's an apartment complex for seniors. And I had to allocate NIF funds to fix the sidewalk because people who are using wheelchairs couldn't even go on the sidewalk to ride their wheelchair up or down the street, which is dangerous, being on a sidewalk on a hill. And so, again, that's all part of quality of life and investing in our infrastructure. The other thing too, fixing the roads actually benefits the city so that we're not getting constant inquiries within our claims department because someone busted their tires on a pothole or someone tripped. So if we make those investments in the long term, it might be a little expensive upfront, but in the long term, it benefits the city because we're not paying out all of these claims. So I think that is really critical. You had mentioned something earlier about just kind of the nonprofits and
yeah, making Brown and PC pay their fair share. Are you talking about when I said how the city would kind of have an advantage when looking at this to make them pay their fair share?
So just looking at, again, all of the nonprofits, I think like Lifespan, the universities, they're some of our top employers for the city. And so one of the things that we also can look at is if these nonprofits are in the city of Providence, perhaps we can look at some models in other cities that are doing programs where the university itself or the hospitals are incentivizing people to live in the city, right? And that way we're again increasing the tax base, and these people are part of the community and paying taxes, and those tax dollars can also go into the funds to support some of the infrastructure projects. So there are many approaches that we can take, but again, we need to make sure that the stakeholders are at the table. And when we're assessing these current plans that exist, we're looking at what worked, what we didn't work, so we can actually bring forth data and we can make some data-informed decisions that are in the best interest of the city of Providence.
And looking at the influx of federal money that the city will be getting too from the American Rescue Plan, could you see any investments from that money being used towards the infrastructure and the roads?
Absolutely. So that's why I also, with the additional funds that came in, I actually put in legislation to create a task force that just started meeting. And what I hope that we can do is to provide recommendations to make some investments that will, again, benefit the city of Providence. One of the things is housing. We've been talking about the shortage of housing for quite some time. Year after year, Housing Works put out the full report, and at the end of the day, what does it say? We need more housing throughout the state. And the other thing too, in addition to using some of those funds, I introduced an ordinance that would incentivize development of affordable housing based on AMI. So if we have those tools, the additional federal funding, stimulus funding, having an ordinance, a residential TSA to encourage development of affordable housing, and also the housing fund, those are all tools that we can use to increase the housing supply in the city of Providence.
And now looking at my final question that takes a step away from all the political issues, this is to keep tradition on the show. I ask everybody this question. In your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
Ooh. Well, definitely, Rhode Island is the ocean state. Like that will always, I grew up knowing Rhode Island as the ocean state. I loved when we would go out of town and we would drive in and it would say, "Welcome to Rhode Island, the ocean state." Every year I have a group of friends that come visit from Philadelphia. We didn't have anyone last year because of the pandemic, but this year we had about 16 people who came. We have yet to go to the same beach twice. I put together a whole itinerary, and it's amazing. Our coastal line is, amazing. And to think that you can live in a state where you can go hiking, but then like you could also go that very afternoon, you could drive and go to the beach. We live in a really, really amazing and beautiful, beautiful state. And cities like Providence and Central Falls and, some of our urban core, I think also makes it so unique and beautiful because of the diversity. And finally, the arts that we have here. I think is amazing, and we need to do more to elevate our artists and the art that's happening throughout the city of Providence and throughout the state of Rhode Island, or art initiatives that are happening.
Absolutely. Did any of them ever do the Long Island confusion that's so famous with our state, saying, "Oh, is that somewhere in New York?" The friends that you had mentioned that you go on the trip with.
They never did. They never did. But when I went to college, I initially went to an HBCU, Bethune-Cookman College, founded by Mary McLeod Bethune in Daytona Beach, Florida, during my freshman year of college. And I'll never forget, my friend Andrea and I, whenever people ask where you're from, we're like, Rhode Island. They're like, Long Island. We're like, no, Rhode Island. Long Island, Rhode Island. They're like, Rhode Island. And we're like, yeah, you know, that little tiny state. They're like, oh, wow, you're from Rhode Island. So it was like this whole conversation. And even some people it just didn't click. So we just left it alone.
That happens almost every time you mention Rhode Island to somebody that's not within the New England bubble of like Mass, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Vermont. It happens. And then sometimes I get asked, oh, is it like how they portray on Family Guy? And I'm like, kind of, depending on what part. It's not entirely, but depending on what part of Rhode Island you go to.
That is true. I'll give you that. That is true. That is true. Yeah. And I don't think they have the accents down right.
No, not entirely. It all depends. Like I think it's more of a generational thing. Probably like when that show was created, that was like more common because I believe like a bunch of people from Mass, you know, it kind of gets confused. It's like people can confuse Rhode Island for Long Island. I've even heard confusions of like near Mass, which that one was ridiculous because we're trying to separate ourselves from that state identity wise. On echoing what you said on the Providence thing, are you in favor of PVD Fest coming multiple times a year like it's been proposed?
I actually, you know, the celebration of our neighborhoods, I love that idea because I do think it's nice to have this arts and cultural festival, but I think it's also important throughout the course of the year to have events that are highlighting the artists and the culture of every single neighborhood that leads into this bigger celebration. So I think that is a really good strategy. And also just thinking back in the day, right? Because I grew up here, like Sound Session and other events, they used to do something very similar, like having events in different neighborhoods throughout the city of Providence. So that also gives, you know, some of the artists that might not be known an opportunity to display their art. So I do like that. I also love some of the things that they've done, highlighting spoken words and poetry and having the murals be part of the murals program to be part of that. The pageant parade that Tyler created, First Works, but also some of our other local entities, like the work that Fringe Festival did, but bringing like artists from all communities throughout the city. So I really do enjoy this approach, and knowing that you can go into any neighborhood and have like some sort of activity that's happening to celebrate, again, the unique diversity of the city of Providence. So I like that a lot.
And artists work year round. They don't just work one day a year. So it'd be a nice way to embrace that. I'd love to see like a winter themed PVD Fest because you're so used to seeing it in the summer. And it was always one thing to look forward to towards the end of the school year as a student at TAPA, because some of our student artists would be there and involved with it. Councilwoman LaFortune, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure of mine to have you on.
Raymond, thank you so much. And I'm just so excited that you like went to TAPA because my sister's an artist, my sister's a musician, and she went to Hope High School. And I still remember, I was away to college, but I still remember talking to her after she went to the Fringe Festival. Like Hope High School took a whole bunch of kids to Edinburgh to one of the largest Fringe festivals in the world, and how transformative that was. So it just shows us why arts is so important and how it is able to help young people cultivate skills to also like create programs like you're doing right now. So thank you for having me here. And this was a great conversation.
Absolutely. And without a doubt on the point you just made there, because honestly, without going there, I mean, because I was a film major there, I had resources and great teachers who encouraged me to go into my untapped potential as an artist, which then led to my interest in like film, that then led into journalism, which then led into political journalism, and full circle, here we are in a year after Ray-ality TV has been on YouTube. And thanks again for coming on the show, and thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button down below, along with the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari. I'll see you on the next episode.